one of our members, Nick Temple.
Hello.
We'll be talking about cryptocurrency. I do not know what this is, so I will be learning as well.
Cool. Okay, so I want to keep this relatively formal. I've got a few points that I want to go over today, but if there's any questions, go ahead and interrupt me, and if we get into some cool side chains, that would be great. I'd really like to have an open discussion here. So first, my name is Nick Temple. I have a consultancy here at WeWork. I basically work with emerging technologies, including blockchain and payments. I've been working in payments specifically for a long time, since the late 90s. I worked with a company called Signio that did credit card payments. They were purchased by VeriSign and then ended up as a product of PayPal. I also worked with one of the first digital currencies, which was DigiCash's eCash. That was again back in the late 90s. It was more of a centralized digital currency, and it had a specifically anonymous, its claim to fame was anonymity, except that it had to go through a central bank where you lost that, right? So it wasn't perfect, but it was some of the precursors to the current Bitcoin today. So that's kind of where I come from. Have you guys, who here has actually purchased or used Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the other cryptocurrencies? So you're holding some now, or, okay, cool. So nobody else? And great, so so this will be a 101, and I will dive into some of the real basics here. So Bitcoin and its cousins, Ethereum, and all of the other ones, I think are misnamed as a coin, because that kind of has this feeling of something that is physical that you're passing around, where really I think that a better metaphor for that might be a distributed checking account, where you have pretty much unlimited accounts, right? So you've got this big ledger, and each person can have more than one address on that. And that's kind of where the money goes in and out of. It's not something you really hold. When you hold a coin, really all you're doing is holding what some people call a key, what I call a certificate, that gives you access to a specific address on this blockchain. Does that resonate with anybody? Any questions?
So the blockchain is the ledger itself?
The blockchain is the ledger itself, and it's called a blockchain because transactions come into about 200, and then they're tallied up and they're put on the ledger, and then another 200 will come in and that'll be put on the ledger, and those are all chained together in such a way. So it's a chain of blocks of transactions that's stored in a distributed fashion. Instead of having a centralized bank with one ledger, the ledger is copied to multiple different entities. So if one entity goes down, one entity goes out of business, you still have the rest of them. It also enforces a trust, in that if you trust that half or more of the entities there are playing by the rules, then everything's going to go fine. If a bad guy were to control more than half of them, then things would really go south. But the idea here is that I don't have to trust you. What I can do is I can trust that at least half the people in the room are good guys, and everything's going to be okay. Does that resonate, make any sense? Questions? Have I lost anybody at this point? Okay. Let's see. Calendar. So one interesting piece of this is there is unlike a coin, again, where you just have a certificate to an address. Whoever owns that actually has access to the funds. And that means that since these are just bits on a disk, 2 or 3 people could potentially own that, right? So who actually owns the coin if 2 people have a copy of it? The answer to that is the first person to spend the money. First person to spend the money gets access to it, and the rest of the transactions will be rejected. So it's incredibly important that you keep that certificate close to yourself. backed up at all times. I had a friend of mine who actually mined tens of Bitcoins back in the day. His computer crashed. He has no access to that. And that's a lot of money today that is completely lost. So really treat that well. So Bitcoin was kind of one of the first, or actually the first blockchain. Since then, people have copied that technology and made some changes to it. Some people would call improvements, some people wouldn't. One of those is Ethereum, and that's the one that I think is really interesting, because what it's done is it's added the capability to run additional, basically, programs. Well, let me back up. One thing I forgot to cover was that what's stored on that blockchain is actually data, and that data is stored in a script. So it was really, with Bitcoin, you could pretty much store the transactions and that's it. Some people have done some other things with it. But with Ethereum, you can actually store additional information in addition to the transactions on the ledger. And this information can be in the form of, for example, tokens. And a token would be a company would say, hey, I want to have my own currency, so let's use the Ethereum blockchain, but store our ledger on it as well. And so it can store multiple different types of tokens. And that's really cool, and that is what has enabled the ICO economy that has basically taken off in the last 6 months or so, especially in 2017. So again, you've got a blockchain, which is a ledger. You've got tokens that can be stored on that ledger in addition to the currency itself. And then from there, companies are creating their own currencies and then sending that out, and some people are making millions of dollars off of this very quickly. What's interesting is, so one thing that some people have done in the past that isn't going to be happening in the United States going forward is they've been doing it like an IPO, where they've basically been selling shares of their company but calling them coins or tokens. The SEC has stepped in, we all expected this, actually yesterday, and said, you can't do that. If it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, and it walks like a duck, it's a duck. If it looks like a security, I don't care if you call it a coin or whatever, we're going to regulate it like a security. So what you can't really do is skip registering your company with the SEC and doing all that paperwork just because you're calling an ICO instead of an IPO. What you can do, however, is if your business model has coins that are inherent to it. For example, let's say you've got a game and you've got resources people have to go out and find, and then they can trade that, like a World of Warcraft or a Second Life or something like that. Then those coins could be put on a blockchain and people could trade those, and they will have inherent value. And just like in a Kickstarter, where you pre-sell your product before you have it built, you can pre-sell your coins. And I think that that's really where the digital economy for an ICO comes into play. If you have or you find a business model that works well with tokens that people can trade, then you can go through the steps and have an ICO and get a lot of funding, just like if you were doing a Kickstarter or crowdsource, in order to fund the development of that technology. So any questions up to this point? Next, I'm going to go into what makes a successful ICO. Nothing? Okay, so the first thing that I mentioned is that your system should have an intrinsic use for tokens. Don't just tack on, hey, we're going to sell tokens and then use that to fund our company, because SEC is going to come down on that. But if your platform actually does have something that people can trade that can be represented by tokens, then you've got a really good use case for building out an ICO. So let's assume you've got that. The next thing you want to do is you want to create a white paper, which basically says, this is who you are, this is what you're going to, this is how your platform works, this is who the team is, and be as transparent as you can. Be upfront, be honest with your investors, set real goals, set ways that that them investing in you is not only going to help your company, but is eventually going to help them as well. Being honest here is absolutely critical. The next thing I suggest is having a solid team. Having people who know your marketplace. I mean, that's just good practice, right? Get your team together. If you don't have specific experience with an ICO, find somebody who does, bring them on. Get people who understand the community, who understand there's still a lot of insider stuff this is a very small community relative. So get people who are into it, get those people on your team to help you out with your ICO and to lend you some credibility. And of course, you're gonna have to prove to them that you've got a real business and for them to be able to endorse you. So that does have some transitive trust that comes in with that. And all of that really is about protecting the investor's interest, right? Because they're going to give you money and they want to get something in return for that. You want to be able to build out your product and have a successful business, but they're not just doing it out of the goodness of their heart, though that is part of it, is that investors do like helping out companies, but they really do want to see you succeed. So really protect the interest of your investors. This can be a combination of the next thing I suggest is having the big point I wanted to make here is protect the interests. You can do things like having a solid team, as I mentioned, also escrow. Make sure that you don't get the money until it's actually successful, so that the founders aren't just going to take the money and run off with it. Make sure that if for some reason you don't get the target that you meant, that there's a way to refund that money back to investors. Investors will be looking for these things and that will help them decide whether or not they want to fund your company. Right? If they feel that you're being honest with them and they have protections in place, then they're going to start trusting you and you'll have a successful crowdfunding. And then once you do that, you really need to figure out how to have great PR. I would suggest hiring somebody who is familiar with the area again, and getting on Reddit and Bitcoin Talk. Even consider having your own Slack channel where your developers can actually respond to people's questions, right? Again, it goes back to transparency, goes back to building trust, goes back to having a solid business model, and over-communicate the information to your investors. And if you do this and you've got something solid and you've got a good idea, people are going to naturally gravitate, and you've got something solid that you can crowdsource. Really, that's all I had for today. So I'm open to questions, to comments, to basically anything else. And if you're thinking that an ICO might be right, let's connect. I've got some contacts within in the industry and looking to build more. And I'm really excited to kind of find out what you guys are doing and what you're interested in. So, any questions, any comments? Yes, absolutely.
Curious about the use of blockchain in non-corporate environments,
Uh-huh.
looking at humanitarian purposes or foundations and things like that. Now they're talking about kind of giving a base level of Bitcoin for refugees, for instance. What could be the applicability of that to
It's wide open. I've heard and read a little bit about what you're talking about. It's not my area of specialty, but I really think that cryptocurrency and the ability to basically create value and have that exchanged, I think that it could be used, for example, a basic level of income for people. I think it could be used for all kinds of different use cases, and we're barely scratched the surfaces. That said, one thing that I didn't have in my notes that is very important is right now especially, it's very volatile, right? It's going up, it's going down. I expect this stuff to go up, I expect it to crash. I expect it to go up, I expect it to crash over the next few years while we figure this shit out, while we answer questions like you just posed about how exactly are we going to use this, what does this stuff really mean? Because a fiat currency, for example, the US dollar, is based on the credit of the United States. And while that might not be 100% perfect, there's something real there. Bitcoin basically is whatever people think that its value is. There isn't anything really backing it. So until we kind of figure that piece out, it's going to go up, it's going to go down, be volatile. Long term, I'm bullish. I think that this is going to change the way the economy works. I think it's going to help level the economic playing field. I mean, right now, in order to be able, if you're in the United States, to invest in an IPO, you have to be an accredited investor. Real normal people can get into ICOs and other types of crowdfunding and be able to do okay and actually help out. I know that doesn't really answer your question, but I'm just saying that I am bullish on types of things that we can do with this, and it's open to the imagination. Come up, be creative with this stuff. Yeah.
A bunch of questions, but re-involve normal people in projects right now, ICOs.
Yeah, I am involved in a couple of different projects. They're very, very early stage. One is an augmented reality game that is going to be using tokens to express intellectual property rights for items in the game. And then we're investigating the applicability of an ICO for that at some point in the future. And then there's a company that I'm just talking to that I can't even give the name for, that has done a couple of ICOs for people, and we're talking about using their platform on a couple of different projects. So I can't be real specific there, but I am involved in a few. Yeah, for example, I like to look at, I think that even though it's centralized, Second Life and the Linden actually is a pretty interesting model where people actually buy and sell virtual property inside of the game. And I think that that is almost a perfect use case for a token that can be traded on an exchange outside of the controlling company, right? So we're looking at doing something similar to that, but allowing it to be publicly traded rather than just attempting to control the economy. Very, not specifically. Very little bit, yeah. Uh-huh.
Ended up only selling around 5% of the tokens.
Mm-hmm.
And so 95% is still owned by the company.
Right.
Which is super centralized. And I see companies doing that, and they're, people say that's how companies should have their ICOs instead of having a centralized organization still preserve like loves the profit.
Right. So the question becomes what the goal of the company is, right? If the goal is just to raise a little bit of cash in order to fund development, that's one thing. If it's to bootstrap an economy within their platform, that would be a little bit different way of doing it. So I'm not sure where the question is in there, but I'd love to kind of discuss what people are doing with this stuff. Yeah.
You mentioned that you need like quite a few things for ICO, I'm wondering like your consultancy, like what services you offer,
So today I am doing this talk in part to bring myself up to speed on it and to connect with people. Specifically, what I can do in the ICO market for you today is connect you with some other people who actually know a lot more than I do, and who can and who have facilitated some of those ICOs. And I'd love to find out more about your project and just figure out how we can work together. My background is actually as a developer, so I've been doing that for a very long time, and I'm working right now on some of the emerging technologies. I am basically familiar with. I haven't, and I guess the space agency. I forgot their name, but anyway, yeah, yes. Sounds good. Any other questions, comments? We can hang around and talk, but I think it's time to turn off the videos, and then we'll just hang out for a little while. And I've got business cards right here. I'll set them here for anybody who wants them. I'm down on the 3rd floor at WeWork. Thank you.